your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, and I'm going to tell you what, the conversation we're going to have today ties into how we even got this whole thing started. My very special guest is Dr. Michaela Johnson, and she is going to share with us about 7 primal wounds. Welcome to the program. Do I need to go to the ER for these?
No, these are your emotional survival wounds. They're not very obvious on the outside until people tend to open their mouth when they're in arguments and then they come blaring out.
Well, I'll tell you, because I've shared this with you already, and most of the listeners already know, my wife and I are having to move, and the whole, everything that's going on around that, boy, is sure generating all kinds of, I don't want to necessarily say old trauma, but maybe new in the sense that I don't want to generate that trauma. I want to look at these different events from a different way so I don't have to deal with the trauma. But we're not going to start there, okay? People have trauma. One of my guests actually said that it is not the event on the external of the human being that is the trauma. We create the trauma inside of us based upon what we are perceiving on the outside. Because you and I could look at the same event and you walk away going, no big deal. And I'm a puddle over in the corner. But it's the same event. So it isn't the externals. It's how we perceive on the inside that generates those traumas, correct?
Yeah, and I think, there's a couple of components to that I can add to it. So perception is definitely our reality. I think also, though, the environment in which we are modeled has a lot to do with our perception. So if everything is a dramatic event from an early on age that we witness in the people that are modeling how to handle adversity and difficult challenges in our life, then we are going to approach our environment in the same dynamic, in the same way. And so I think some of it does come back to the environment in which we're brought up. So yes, how we perceive it, how we process it, how we store it internally, that's all definitely a part of the definition or the expression of the trauma in our life for sure.
And even though the events are all different, the externals, is the trauma we choose, because I do believe it is a choice, we choose to take on this trauma, to create this trauma within us, just like we choose to be happy, just like we choose to cry, to laugh, to get angry, etc., etc. What are the differences when you talk about 7 primal traumas, or wounds, I should say, wounds. So where is the differentiation? How are you cutting
Sure.
that up?
Let me explain it. So, for example, the easiest analogy that I have is as a young person, at some point, you started to learn how to cook on the stove. And at some point, you touched the stove and it was hot. And in that moment, your body had a reaction, and the reaction was stored in all sorts of ways within your human existence so that in the future, you know how to navigate this hot stove scenario. Now, there are different ways you can approach hot stoves moving forward, right? So, this is a wound, as tiny as it might be. Some people will completely panic and freak out and never cook on a stove again, and they'll microwave something for the rest of their life, right? Some people learn how to engage with the stove safely, have it on, recognize whether it's hot, deal with it in a slightly different manner than somebody else might. So these 7 primal wounds are patterns that I started to see playing out in the dynamic between individuals over a pattern of 15 years. And I spent about 3 years in my doctoral research studying these primal wounds. And what they are is they're basically core beliefs that form as a very young person. Something simple like I'm not good enough. It doesn't mean you had terrible parents. It just means that you had a hot stove moment. In your teen years, it became a never ever statement like I'm never going to be good enough. And then as an adult, we paradoxically pick out people and situations that affirm that belief because it's comfortable to us. We actually know how to navigate the world not feeling good enough. It's that belief on repeat. And so, what I teach people is how to disempower the wound by recognizing when it's activated and putting it in the appropriate spot, which 9 times out of 10 is the co pilot seat. Now, sometimes that wound needs to be driving the bus because it's actually protecting you from something. But majority of the time, we can manage cooking on the stove without getting burned, right? Every
Mm-hmm.
once in a while, that's going to happen. So we really need to put the narrative in the right spot so that we can continue to live life in the best way possible. Now, I'll tell you, the people that I've come across that have the undeserving primal wound, they go on to run nonprofits. They're completely the bleeding heart types. They do amazing things for the planet, right? That's not to say everybody else doesn't. It just says that they take the lead. The incapable types, they want to prove that they're intelligent and smart enough. So they're like, hold my beer. Let me show you how smart I am. They go on to be entrepreneurs of very successful businesses. So the wound can actually serve a very good like purpose in our mission of life. It's only when we start to kind of lean toward the maladaptive behaviors and start microwaving food every day that it starts to become a problem.
Yeah. It's interesting that you put it that way because the longer I do these programs, the more conversations I have. I start to begin to realize, and I even asked this of a gentleman who wrote a book having to do with psychopaths and sociopaths, and he made the interesting statement, and you sort of alluded to that too when it comes to these different kinds of traumas, that as bad as we might think sociopaths and psychopaths are, egotists and so forth, narcissists are, the reality is, if you look at the big picture, all of the parts, in other words, we put the narcissist in a circle and we walk around the circle taking different perspectives. There are some good things about narcissists in that they get things done. Now, doesn't necessarily mean that the end justifies the means, but they get things done. So that I think is an important perspective. And in an interview that I just did, we talked a lot about that in terms of the points on a circle and getting a different perspective. What is the way you have designed or come up with to help a person dealing with one of these 7 wounds to begin to get a different perspective, broaden, if you will, their horizons of a sort, and begin to let go of the trauma? They can't change their history. It is what it is, you know. Um,
So
but
to
go
touch
ahead.
on the narcissistic epidemic a little bit, I mean, in my experience, some narcissists, if we were to define them by the DSM,
Hmm.
are effective at getting things done. At what cost to humanity around them?
Right.
That kind of begs to be explored a little bit because there's two ways to remodel a building, and one of them is to use a wrecking ball,
Right.
and one of them is to kind of intentionally take down certain walls and be strategic about how you do it. So I would kind of like to say, yes, I see your past guest point about having different perspective, and I'm a big fan and supporter of that. I also am finding that in the work that I'm doing,
Mhm.
there does seem to be some sort of an epidemic playing out, and it's having some pretty impactful negative effects on relational systems, family systems, generational trauma. So I think there's a lot there to unpack, and we could almost do an entire episode just on that. But to answer your question of how do I help people identify the primal wound, well, I have a quiz that they can take in my sessions. I actually work one-on-one with clients on that. And once they identify the wound, I give them a framework. And within that framework, the very first thing is to learn how to take a pause
Mhm.
when you're activated. Because a lot of times people don't even understand the why that they're upset. Like they're just angry or they're just sad, they're just whatever, depressed, fill in the adjective blank,
Right.
and they don't really understand what's underneath that. And so when they can kind of strip back the layers of the onion, take a pause, then we can kind of start to reframe the way we see our world. And that's the perspective you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's just say that I have my family over for dinner and they say, gosh, this was great. It was a little bit too spicy. Right. So the story that I might tell myself, and this is how I teach my clients in that moment, is that I suck at cooking. I should never invite anybody over. I'm never going to get this right, whatever. And if we take a pause and go, ooh, that's my inadequate wound. That's my not good enough wound, actually. This has nothing to do with a comment about it being a little spicy, because that again is someone else's perspective. Maybe I didn't even think it was that spicy, but I went to the place where I told myself that I was not adequate or good enough, right?
Right.
So when we take a pause and we recognize the narrative underneath it, then we can reframe it. And
Yeah.
we can say, well, that person might have thought it was too spicy, but I did a great job on cooking a fantastic meal that had more than four ingredients, and I'm really proud of myself.
What about the perspective of I had 10 people over and only one person thought it was too spicy? Okay, well, that's their problem, not mine, in one sense. And hey, I did a great job. I mean, I went all out and had all these people over and let them into my home and all of the self-adulation, if you will, that is not egotistical, mind you. That is, then maybe that's another area too that we talk about too is, um, there's an old saying that says if you don't toot your horn, no one else will. So there's nothing wrong with me saying, and this is in a general sense, I'm good at what I do. I've been doing it for 46 years. And I think I've learned something in spite of the fact that about 2 months ago I received a phone call, and I get on the line. I say hello, and all of a sudden I hear, "Hold on, just a moment. Let me get so and so on the line." So the next thing I know, I'm on speakerphone, and this person who answered the phone is now screaming and yelling at me in with profanity. For again, I don't know the reason. However, I have learned enough to know that when someone is doing something like that, it ain't about me. Something's going on in their life right now, and they're just choosing to attack me. I'm just the nearest target. Well, I didn't put up with it. I hung up, of course. And then, of course, about 5 minutes later, I get an email with all the same stuff minus the profanity. And these emails kept coming that evening until I got one that basically said, "You're the worst, absolutely the worst. And that's a stupid hat that you wear. You look creepy and just another anti Semite." Direct quote. All right. Well, here's what happened when I shared this with my wife. She broke into tears because she felt that, oh my God, and she said this, "I'm so sorry they hurt you." And I said, "They didn't hurt me. They didn't hurt me because I don't own it. It's not mine. It's theirs. Whatever they're going through, I just happen to be the one who's getting hit with the snowballs or whatever. And I left it alone. I haven't touched it. I've shared the story. Yes, I don't name names, of course, but for me, thank God I've learned enough, because in the past, I would have taken it in. I would have ruminated and worried and on and on and on, which then would have affected my performance on the job that I do. And then who knows, maybe down the road, oh, hey, you know what? Your performance is really sunk to a certain level. We're going to have to let you go.
Yeah.
But
I think
go
that
ahead.
you're kind of hinting on two things, and one of them is the whole hurt people. And if you know your truth, then it doesn't have to really affect you, right? Because you're walking in your purpose. And I think that's a really powerful thing. But I'll tell you a story when you said, what about the ego, right? What about the knowing that you did something good? And when my son was young, he came out of school and he had done this little project and he got, a couple plus marks on it. And he said, "Look, Mom." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you." And he said, "I'm proud of myself." Like he was almost like mortified that I was proud of him because he was proud of himself and that was more important. And from there, I kind of took the perspective that, if your child would be proud of themselves for what you just accomplished, then you're probably not leading with ego because the child lives in that pure space of
Mm,
just exploring the world in a way of taking a challenge and seeing if they can accomplish it or seeing if they fall flat on their face without kind of that extra stuff that we add as adults. So in your case of to flip it to the kind of more, destructive stuff that came up, I would say, would your child self be proud that you didn't let the bully get to you? Yeah. I think that's a really positive thing. I think it's
now,
a really good way to walk through the planet.
7 primal wounds, and that is the subject of today's conversation with Michaela Johnson, Dr. Johnson. And we're so glad that she's with us here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Reverend Dr. D. Richard Dugan, and is there a test or a quiz or something that we could take
Yes.
that would help us to A, understand, and then B, know which of the 7 wounds, God forbid we would have all seven, but nonetheless, um, it sounds like if they did, they're a functional wounded person, you know. And I know that we all carry certain wounds, but back to a quiz or a test that we can take to at least begin the process of better understanding self.
Absolutely. On 7primalwounds.com, there's a Myers-Briggs like test, right, where they can actually answer a series of questions that funnels them down through the way that their mind works to really determine what is underneath all the layers and peel it back and find out what their prevailing primal wound is. And to your point, I've yet to find anyone that is completely tied for 2 primal wounds. There's always one that tends to pull ahead, and that's that hot stove moment, right? So it's kind of like, did you touch your hand on the hot stove first, or did you fall off your bike first and scuff your knee, right? And once you identify the primal wound from that place, it gives you some resources on how to start to navigate it. And then, of course, my book just opened today for pre-order on Amazon, 7 Primal Wounds. You can find it on there too, which is really exciting. And I think the thing I'm most excited about is that my clients have been begging for this book, even though they work with me once a week. So it speaks a lot to the ways in which, the book really exposes what's going on, normalizes, helps people realize they're not broken, and provides actual tangible exercises. Because I think a big problem in the self-help industry today is a bunch of mumbo jumbo that you can't actually apply. And I think that's the reason that, James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, has been so successful, because people can actually take what's in that book and apply it to their everyday life immediately. And that's exactly what 7 Primal Wounds sets out to do as well.
Mm. Now, is the 7 spelled out or is it the number?
It's the number.
Okay.
I try to make it easy.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. We all do. And we'll be linked to that website, folks. We will. We'll be linked to that website so that we can guide you to what Michaela is doing. This is an important um, an important subject because we got a lot of people that are walking around wounded. Now, what I find interesting too is, then this is a whole thing on changing one's perspective. We have people in positions, prominent positions in this country and around the world. And if you watch them for just a little while, you can see they're wounded too. In spite of the way they're talking and acting and behaving, and maybe because of the way they're doing that. And for me, it was an interesting, you might say, comeuppance of sorts. I had somebody that was really just on the national level was just irritating the daylights out of me. I just could not listen to this person. I just would turn it off at every turn. And then something hit me, and it was sort of my intuition telling me, look, you've got to do the following. And the first one was the hardest. Out loud, you must say to this person, no, they'll never hear you, for um, thank you, teacher, for teaching me how not to be. I had to give the person the title of teacher. And the reality is we're all teachers for each other anyway. So then the second step was geared more towards myself. I forgive you, but more importantly, I forgive myself for allowing myself to be dragged into this quagmire. The third one was a question. No judgment. I'm not asking for anything other than what is it that you are so afraid of that makes you talk and behave this way? You don't have to change. I just want to understand so I can move on. I shared that with one of my guests. They said, you got one more to go. I said, really? They said, yeah. Now you have to say, like you said it with the first step, I love you and mean it. They have every right to be here on the planet just like you. You don't have to like them, but you do have to accept them as a member of the population. And they're just doing what they're doing. So I went through those steps, and I try to remember those every time this comes up for me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's less and less and less because I've realized that the only one I can control is me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also a lesson that you are really trying to get across to folks that, granted, the trauma may have come from another person, maybe a parent who, smacked you. I mean, I remember my father. He hit me in the arm with a brush when I was 8 or 9, the back of the brush. And boy, he was regretful and remorseful for the next 2 hours. He says, I can't believe I am so, I mean, and he was not an abusive parent. It was just a moment where I pushed a little too far, okay, with my cuteness or behavior or whatever it was. Didn't mean that he abdicates responsibility, but it's just one of those things. Talk to us about that particular aspect.
I would go back to what you said first, because one of the things that I think is really important is that you can say to the person, your first step, hey, thanks for the reminder. That's the way that I phrase your first step.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the reminder of what I don't want to be. Thanks for the reminder that I don't want to be in a relationship with you. Thanks for the reminder that I don't want to engage with my world like this. Thanks for the reminder that I need to focus my energy somewhere else. So the mantra that I use is thanks for the reminder, but similar to yours.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say, and what is it about this moment that I'm telling myself? What is the story underneath it? What am I saying? Because I feel like that's really important. So, for example, the story you might be telling yourself is that, oh, this is going to have a really bad outcome for the planet, or this is going to have a really bad outcome for the pine trees that I love, or this is going to have a really bad outcome for my finances, right? So what's the story in that moment that you tell yourself about what that person just said or did? And I think that's a really important, you can make it a 1.2 or a 2.1 or however you want to throw it in your 3. But I think asking yourself that question helps with the number 4 that your listener or your guest gave you, which was the empathy and love piece. Because once you can draw your own feelings to it, it's a little bit easier to find compassion.
Yeah.
It humanizes the whole experience. So I like that. And then the secondary component about what you asked is, how do I, suggest people frame these kind of primal wounds that they live through? And what I say most importantly is, congratulations, you're working very well. Your body is doing exactly what it is intended to do, which is keep you alive and protect you from things that suck. So you're not broken. This is amazing. And that's kind of the reframe that I take on a lot of these things is like, hey, I'm freaking killing it today, you know? I mean, you would certainly not be upset at yourself for slamming on the brakes when the freeway comes to a stop.
Hmm.
You would not be angry at that overreaction because 9 times out of 10, maybe you stopped way sooner and you didn't need to slam the brakes on that hard, but sometimes it saved your life.
Yeah.
Right? So I like to just tell people you're working really well. Congratulations, you're not broken. You don't need to be angry about it. That doesn't help anything or anyone. Let's look at it as actually what it's doing, which is protecting you and keeping you alive and keeping you a part of the pack.
Dr. Michaela Johnson is my guest. What kind of a doctor specifically are you? In other words, I broke my arm. Do I come to see you? Or I got those 7 wounds. I come to see you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I got the PhD, the Papa Hotel Delta. So that would be of philosophy.
Okay,
I
wonderful.
definitely do not bring me your bloody wound because I'm going to tell you to get out immediately. Go.
Call 911.
I'm the last person. Do not come with that.
That's right. Well, I know that there are those I have watched get their PhDs. I actually sat in on it was weird the way it was phrased, their defense of their thesis. And
Mm.
I'm going, wait, what? How come you have to defend it? What, you're going up against somebody? Is this a competition? I understand it now. And I feel as though I should have my PhD in what I like to call eclectic studies. For the past 46 years, I've produced some, I'm just guessing here, 50 or 60,000 programs, and all of a wide variety of subjects from cars to real estate to gardening to politics and religion. I mean, you could name one, and I've probably done a program on it at least once. And I love the guests that the programmers bring in. It's like, wow, this is cool. Another class. I'm sitting in on another master class here on this subject. It's really very cool. And
Totally.
I like to think that of my guests when I bring them on and learning from them, such as yourself. This is also I call it my therapy too. This is my therapy.
Yeah,
So,
right?
so there you go. This is a fascinating conversation. We're having 7 primal wounds. And I'm curious as to when you began your study in this area in terms of trauma and primal wounds, and we're able to codify it down to just 7. Because I know a lot of people, you could have 100 people in a room and they say, well, my trauma is this and my trauma is that. And you got 100 different types, 100 different wounds. So how'd you pare that down? How'd you get that started?
You know, I really say that this kind of comes back to 15 years of having my butt in the seat and seeing the patterns. The doctoral research actually started with identifying more than 10, 11 initially, and then realizing that nope, once I started working with clients on the wound, they all fell into these 7 buckets. Um, and not only that, but I've read 600 plus medical journals, self-help books, all the things. I mean, going back to Ainsworth and Bowlby's attachment stuff, Eric Burns' transactional analysis, Jung, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're talking about Freud, right? Like this is 15 years of kind of putting all of this together from a lot of different angles to identify the 7. And, you know, being an ever learner myself, one thing that I say is this is the beginning of the primal wound journey for me. There's so much to unpack. I'm learning a lot in working with couples in the way that fantasy and sexual intimacy can actually help heal these wounds in terms of kind of the imagination part of self that we go to when we're being intimate with someone who's safe. So there's a lot here that's still going to be unfolding and coming out as I continue to kind of do the work. So it's exciting time for sure.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's funny too, because you talk about the 600 books. I just, as a part of our move, we are paring down like you would not believe. Not because we're moving into a smaller place by far be it. We're moving into a 2-story, 1,400 square foot home through 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. And I just gave away, I'm just guessing, close to 700 or 800 more books, no, some of which I brought with me from Phoenix back in 2006. The others I've collected over the last 19 years of working here in Santa Barbara. And as I'm going through them, I'm going, oh, I don't really want to give that one away. And it's like, look, you have the interviews with these people. All right. You really don't need to keep the book. And the other plus is these days, more and more, I'm getting electronic or ebooks. I don't need them on my shelves. However, there were some that I have kept,
Yeah.
and so that's been a real. It's been fun, and I even found a song that I wrote. The very first song I ever wrote back in 1993, 4, 5, something like that. I was going through a personal growth program. I'm curious as your thoughts about those. I went through LifeSpring, which was an outgrowth of Est. The song was written sort of to my dyad partner. She's just a wonderful person. She actually lives in the Azores off of Portugal. Anyway, I wrote this song having to do with the 3 nights and a weekend was all we had together, having to do with the program that we were in. But in that program that used to be, they would tear you down. They would cut away all of the BS, right? For example, the first night, people were moaning and groaning they didn't want to be there. And the facilitator stood up and said, I hear you don't want to be here. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you didn't want to be here, you wouldn't be here. Ergo, by the fact that you are here means you want to be here. I mean, you can't defy the logic, right? But what do you think about group programs like that? Is that really going to help people to work through the stuff that ails them? I mean, can it be a good support place or can it actually do more harm than good?
That's a great question. I mean, I think people are in different phases of their quote self-development, right? And I think that you can take anything in life that seems good and turn it into an addictive problem, right? So I
Yeah.
think that comes back to the perspective in which we are, employing it into our life and how we're letting it kind of drive the bus, so to speak. So I think that group environments can be very uplifting and very positive, so long as you're not walking in there being untruthful with yourself and everyone in the room because you haven't done enough work to show up in that environment and be vulnerable and honest. Because otherwise, all you're going to receive is a bunch of affirmations, and it's actually not going to help you move through what you need to, depending on the situation. So I
Hmm.
think it's just everything with the lens of, am I being vulnerable? Am I being transparent? And why am I doing this? And I think no matter what, if you are clear on your why, then your what and your outcome is always going to look a little bit better. I have people that will come to me first week every year of the new year, which PS is not in January. It is actually in March. Worst time ever to be trying to set a goal in the dead of the winter. But they'll come to me and they'll say, I have a goal this year. I'm going to lose 15 pounds. And I say, why? And they say, well, I want to feel better about myself. And I say, did you want to feel better about yourself yesterday? Yes. Okay, well, what's changed today? Except that now you just put this rule on yourself that you're going to lose 15 pounds. So let's really talk about why, and let's really drill down, and then we can employ some tactics that will actually help you get from point A to point B and embrace the journey and not the outcome. So if my why is to go to a group program to be able to understand better the blind spots that I have in my life, and I go in with that mission and I leave having some understanding of those blind spots, then I would say that group program was beneficial.
Hmm.
If I go into a group program because I heard it's really cool and I just don't like the way I feel, and then I go there and a bunch of people are like, kumbayaing me, and I leave feeling all on the high, and then I come home and do nothing about it, change nothing in my life, well, that's not going to be a very effective group program. It's not necessarily the program's fault.
Yeah.
It's your perception, understanding, and reality.
Yeah. I sat there at the beginning listening to the various stories before I was called on. And the thought that went through my, I guess you'd say, egotistical or judgmental mind was, God, when are these people going to get it? Because I'd been reading all these books and everything, right, for a few years up to that point, right? And then again, my intuition said to me, "Do you understand where you are sitting? You are in the same room with them. So it's not why don't they get it? It's you, because you're in there too." So it's like, "Ooh, okay, I better shut up and listen and see how I can help myself." Now, initially, I was going through another program with my first wife, and she was totally blind. And she wanted to go through this program that she'd heard about. And I'm thinking, okay, well, all right, I'll be your guide. Okay, I will guide you. Uh-uh. No, if I go into that room with her, I'm doing it too.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But I sure as heck was not going to let her go by herself. Now, that's not to say that the people wouldn't have looked after her, but I felt a little bit more protective than that. And I thought, no, I better be there with her. And so, and it was a good experience. And we went through several of those programs together, and it was very enlightening. And then all of the books. Do you consider what you offer as self-help? Does that fall into that category at all?
No, I actually call it unself-helping. I
Okay.
literally call it unself-helping because I feel like people get stuck in the idea that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. You're going to be on a perpetual journey. And I'm not saying you won't be on a perpetual journey, but I think when we shift the mindset a little bit and reframe it, that you're actually working on overdrive, that you're actually working really well, it alleviates a lot of the shame and guilt that kind of comes with seeking self-help.
Hmm. I am excited about all of this that you're talking about, but that what we're talking about here, even in a general sense, because there are people who are seeking help and they don't know where to turn. And I'd like to think they could turn not to me, okay, but to this program because we provide the resources, such as yourself. And a website that we want them to go to is 7primalwounds.com, correct?
Yes, and can I tell you something funny?
Sure.
Your backdrop today is like the typical ink blot, right? Like, so it's like, do you see a man facing another man with a hat, or do you see a duck?
There are
I'm
some who think they're lightning bolts.
right. Okay. It's just kind of ironic. I'm like, oh, I can't shut it off. The psycho babble mind doesn't turn off ever.
Exactly. Dr. Michaela Johnson's my guest. Seven Primal Wounds is the book. We hope you'll get yourself a copy as we continue on Tell Me Your Story. The upside is that I get to have these conversations with you and others. The downside is we can't go on forever. And so we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to talk more about you and your background in that what was it? I don't know. So, because I go back, I try to get people to go back to their childhood to find what it is that they really, really want to do. I've seen a public service announcement where you have these young boys, little kids, playing with their Tonka trucks in the dirt, flash to adults, wearing hard hats, building a building. Go back to children, little girls who are playing with their dolls and they got their stethoscope and their medical stuff. Flash to the ER room, adult women taken care of. And I can do the same thing for myself. So was there something in your childhood or later in your teen years that clicked and said, you know what, this is interesting. I wanna I wanna follow up with this. Where did it start for you?
If you were to ask my mom, she would tell that, from 2 years old when I first started to formulate kind of coherent full sentences, she said that I was always asking, but why though? But why though? She said she can count so many times that they would be at the grocery store and I would say something and continue to probe in such a way that people in the aisles were stopping to get curious about, yeah, why is that actually? So I think that it just started as just a very curious mind at a young age where
Mhm.
I mean, I was certainly programmed on Reading Rainbow and Sesame Street and all those shows to like really kind of look for patterns and look at the world a little bit differently and be a reader and ever learner and explorer. And I think I just grew up with a mindset that I always just wanted to understand more. And that led to a whole foundation, home, castle being built of a lot of questions, some of which I got answers for and others I didn't. And that led me to seek the next thing, right? So if I can't answer this, then I've got to go here to figure out that. And it's kind of like this beautiful mosaic of life.
You know, it's funny because I, working at a Christian station for 15 years in the 80s and early 90s, was asking all kinds of questions because the answers that I had been given didn't make any sense. It's like you, I use my logical brain and say, wait a minute. It's kind of like this one guy who was a comedian. He was saying, why is it that you have burned up and burned down? You know, the building burned up and then, you know, whatever else he says, burned down. I mean, how does that work? You know, what's the juxtaposition? You could even throw in George Carlin and his observation of words as well. And I'm glad there are people out there like that. And I'm trying to do that the same way to try to understand, even like, you know, eschatologically speaking, I would ask these questions and they, oh, just read the writings of the founding fathers. And I'm two things. Number one is, well, I never heard of these people. Okay, fine. But because I'm asking those questions here in the 21st century, well, back in the 20th century, does that put me up at the level of them? I'm equal to the founding fathers because I'm asking those questions too.
Well,
So,
there's a couple of really fun scriptures that started my but why question of scripture. And one, and it says, amidst the Elohim amidst the Elohim. So you have singular and then you have plural. So you have
yeah,
God and then you have gods, which is very fascinating. So that set me on a whole rabbit hole there. And in Genesis, you have created in our image. So who is our, right? So there's a bunch of different things in there when you start to look at, especially ancient Dead Sea Scrolls, Hebrew, Hebraic language, Koine Greek. You start to really tie into it. And as a linguistics person myself, I geek out on words. I've written 10 books now, four of them that are 80,000 words plus.
wow,
I'm a word geek. And so if I'm thinking about a time where they had papyrus and ink, they made their words count,
yeah.
right? And so you can't just fluff it. Did you know that the word sin actually is not described in the Hebraic language if you break it down by the actual artistic letters as it is in the English version of sin?
Of course
It's really
not.
fascinating.
Well, I did an interesting. I read a book by one of my guests going back to the mid 1980s. His name was John Noe. I hope he's still alive, but you never know. The book was called The Apocalypse Conspiracy. One of the books in my collection I did keep, and it
Yes,
was one of the first
it
books.
applies today.
It still applies today, absolutely. And I have it highlighted all over the place. Anyway, it was the first book at that time that I read cover to cover. But there was a problem I had. If I was to share with people what I had read, I would have to say, oh, yeah, John said this and John said that, John Noe. So what I did was I pulled out my Strong's Concordance and I pulled out his book and I started flipping through. And the one thing that was so fascinating to me was he said in the book that I confirmed, nowhere in the New Testament does it refer to the second one, two, three coming of the Christ. It says return, but it didn't say how many times. That was one thing. Then there was the whole business of death. Paul says it is appointed to man every man once to die and then the judgment. Well, wait a minute, hold it. But Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Was he dead or wasn't he dead? Yeah, but why? It goes to your question. Well, why? And then the third one was the what they refer to as the rapture passage, where Paul says they will be caught up to meet him in the air in the clouds of glory. Well, all of the research he did that I then did confirmed that what was being described wasn't a physical, material event or happening. It was internal. It was internal. And so that's when I made the comment that I really got chastised for to one of the people at the station was, did you know that Christianity is metaphysical? Oh my God, no, that's a satanic. Do you even know the definition of the word? No, beyond the physical. And that's with the exception of throwing the money changers out of the temple. That's what he talked about all the time. Everything seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness.
Hmm. Hmm.
Please. So you and I are kind of on the same track there, and it just is fascinating as hell for me to research. And
Well, my most recent geek out is actually on the little season.
the
A
little
very yeah, yeah. You'll get a kick out of this, Richard. You gotta dive into this one. It's
okay,
just 5 to 7 verses, Rev 21, but just Google little season. I
okay,
think it'd be very fascinating. And you'll have to report back to me in email because I'd love to hear what you find.
I definitely will. We're talking some fascinating stuff here with our very special guest. I'm excited. We're going to have you back. Okay, can we have you back?
Yes.
I mean, you've written all these books. We got to find out what the rest of those are and do more as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan along with Michaela Johnson, Dr. Michaela Johnson. Although I go by Reverend Dr. D. The Reverend is official. The doctor is honorary, not from any place. It was given to me by one of my programmers who saw on my business card that I did archival work, and I considered myself an audio physician, retrieving audio from vinyl and tape and so forth. And there you go. Um, I want to thank you for sharing your story and the work that you're doing through this. And by the way, that quiz is available on your website.
7primalwounds.com. And thank you so much for having me.
I'm going there because I want to take that quiz and find out just how. Now, I'll throw one other thing out to you biblically. It says in the New Testament, he says, "Be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Right? Well, what does that word perfect mean? I didn't bother to go to the concordance, okay? I went to the Old Testament. And where God is speaking, he says, I am that I am. Well, God is neither black and white, good or evil, right or wrong, left or right. God just is. Ergo, to be perfect is just to be, and to be who you are because all of the other roles have been taken.
That's right. Be
How do you
you,
like
be
that? That's it.
happy.
You got it. I have three final questions I want to ask you really quickly. I'm going to skip the preliminaries because I know you've got to run. First question is, who is Michaela Johnson?
I mean, there's the commercial pilot, doctor, all that stuff, but I just like to say I'm an ever learner that's just stumbling forward, which is forward progress. So there's that.
What gets you up in the morning?
That's a great question. Oh gosh, let's go with probably the smell of just nature. You
Mm,
know, it's the dawn of the morning that smells a little different than the dawn of the eve, I guess.
mm.
A freshness, a newness for that particular day.
And finally, what was your best day?
Pass. I think my best day is the one that hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Well, I thank you so much for being a part of the work we're doing here. We will have you back, and we'll I'll look up the little season and
Yes.
find out what that's all about, and then we'll get
Yes.
back together again to talk about the other work that you're doing. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story: New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love to all. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for letting me be in your life and being in mine. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.